Hello and welcome to Arcast, a podcast from the Royal College of Art, home to the next generation of creatives, and the world's #1 art and design university, representing the largest concentration of postgraduate artists and designers on the planet. We'll be bringing you insight into the philosophy behind the programs at the RCA by talking to staff, students, and the wider RCA community about what we do here and how the work of architects, artists, communicators, designers, and researchers affect the world at large. I'm Benji Jeffrey, and today I'll be talking to Dave Webster about how we can address local and global challenges by developing research methodologies that are both inclusive and based on research data. Dave is an educator with 20 years' experience at both a national and international level, with a PhD focused on the art and design curriculum and the relationship of student agency to knowledge and knowing. He is also the Assistant Dean in the School of Design here at the RCA. Dave, thank you for joining us today.
Nice to see you today. Excellent.
Yes. So straight into the questions. What does an inclusive research methodology look like?
Okay, that's a really great start question because one of the things we're really keen on is for students, rather than to focus just on a research method, which might be, interviewing somebody, making drawings, counting the number of people that go to a particular place. What we're interested in is developing research methodologies, which means encompassing multiple types of research methods from different disciplines. So they might come from biology or other sciences, or they might come from art, or they might come from design, and integrating them into a methodology which enables them to tackle real-world problems.
And when we talk about it being inclusive, how does that appertain to a research practice?
That's great. Yeah, so that's why I like the question, because essentially what we're saying by putting inclusiveness in front of research methodologies is that every stage of the research process, that inclusivity has to be a driver. It's very easy to think about inclusivity just in relation to one of the steps of, say, how do I collect the data? How do I analyze the data? How do I think about the data or use the data? Actually, if you can just put inclusivity in one of those stages quite easily and call it a research inclusive project. But unless it's embedded in every single stage, it won't truly be inclusive.
And inclusive of what exactly? Because it's quite a big, broad term.
I think we need to talk very practically about this program, because it's about how people are tackling real world problems. And so it's very easy for people to go in to people who haven't got agency to tell them what they should be doing about this challenge.
Right.
So what I suppose in this context it means really being inclusive of all the people who will be affected by this, whatever change or development is taking place, and actually inclusive of all the other types of factors around disability, identity, everything. So it's all considered as part of the process.
And when would you say that kind of became something that people were really thinking about? Because I know even from like 15 years ago, there was a lot of people, doing exactly what you just said, which is telling a group of people how they should feel included.
I think that design has done a lot of things over 15 years to relative merit. Some very well, some less well. I'm a big fan personally of the social model of disability, for example, which doesn't see disability as something that pertains to the person, but is something that society sets up for disabled people. So a designer seeing a social model of disability, which is a contest. I'm on both sides of the fence, but that would be something I would hope students would find out about if they were thinking about those issues.
And I know that there's the Disabled Student Network at the RCA, and they did a collection for our online show last year, which was called Nothing About Us Without Us.
Brilliant.
Which I think is such a nice little bit of phraseology, isn't it, for that?
Lovely. Well, and meaningful. It can sound like a catchphrase, which is brilliant, but in the end, it's important that these things are truly meaningful. And I think one of the things about the Design Futures programme, we are asking students to consider what changes will happen in the near and distant future, but we want it to be based very much on the reality of what's going on in the world now.
So how does Design Futures differ from Design Standard?
I don't know whether it does that much, because it's a design. What we're saying on Design Futures is there's a thing called the design field, which to which any discipline can kind of contribute to make change. So we've got people in the department who come from a biology background, come from finance backgrounds. we're hoping the students on this program will come from all these different backgrounds and will come and think about how the methods that they use can be built into a methodology, not necessarily solve a problem, because I don't think that's always going to be possible, but to help develop a better world.
And when does this process of research become design? Thinking about someone who's a biologist, maybe it's not useful to think in these kind of terms of where the borders lie, but where does the border lie between something being a scientific discovery and a design-based method?
I think that's quite a complicated question, and there's many diagrams that academics have produced about interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, disciplinary. I think for me, it's about bringing together what we can know about and and thinking about what we can't know about, actually. So I sit on the ethics group, and, there's quite complicated because many students want to find out things which are possibly not knowable. And you have to be very mindful. As long as you know what you can know and what you can't know, that's very useful in these things. Assumption is a very dangerous thing, especially in research. So you can go into a research project thinking that you are finding out something, but you just confirmed your assumptions.
Yeah. And is there a lot more impetus put on speculation within these practices? Because I know that, for example, there was someone who studied digital direction here at the RCA who then went on to write speculative fictions for banks so that banks could think about what the potential future of banking was, which I can't imagine happening 20 years ago or something like that.
No, we're not so much a speculative design as actually thinking about what the real world challenges are at this very moment and how we might respond to those. Of course, speculative design will be part of the discussion. I mean, one thing I'm very keen on is we have 66 individuals coming onto this program, and they will take very, very different approaches. And if somebody did that, that would be fine. But we're also hoping that people will do smaller things. I think one of the criteria I have for the program a little bit is because we've asked people already to write a research proposal and made it very clear that proposal will change considerably throughout the 1 year program. And to me, it's about doing something that actually leads to some form of change, even if it's small, could be very, very tiny. So it might be that the people have submitted proposals that are about big, giant themes, which many people have. But what we'd be encouraging them to do is think, well, what can you actually do to make this change that you're talking about in a small way?
Kind of micro, macro. I've just realised as well, we haven't really talked about the course that you're talking about, the Design Futures, which is one of the new programmes that are going to be starting here, which is starting in September.
Yeah, so the RCA has a load of historic courses which are really excellent called MAs. So there are MA provisions. So we have textiles, fashion, service design, design products as MAs. We also have courses we run in collaboration with Imperial. I won't go through the list of those, but we have those as well. What I was brought in to do, I've only been here a year, was to develop a new type of provision that thought about different audience for the RCA, different participants, people to engage with the programs. So we've designed programs that are on the whole interdisciplinary. So there's a set across all of the schools at the RCA. And in the design, we decided that by calling it Design Futures, we could sort of link all the different possibilities. So I suppose the difference between this program and the MA programs is there may be students who make fashion. There may be students who end up as service designers. There may be students who end up as all the different types of design that there are, but they'll be in this broader area. And we're also hoping students will really collaborate with each other because, I've made it clear on open days that I've done that if there are people as they go through the program and they gravitate towards each other, that will be really encouraged.
Yeah, and that's when people start to become things that they didn't think they were going to be. It's always useful to go into something with a sense of direction, but to be malleable with what that could turn into.
Yeah.
So my next big question, was what do you think can and cannot be considered research data? Are there any boundaries to that?
Well, obviously ethics is incredibly important. So ethics is a major component of this particular design program. And ethics in the world is becoming a much larger, important thing with all the lack of boundaries around knowledge and what is true and what is not true and all those. But I don't genuinely believe there are anything out of bounds in terms of data. But I would have add the assumption thing because an awful lot of data can be collected under assumptions. So where I would add caution is thinking, why am I collecting this data? Who's it for? Is it to what capacity? Is it useful? How can it's quite a hard collecting. I did a PhD fairly recently. Collecting data is a very difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
And it is loaded with the way you seek to find it in the first place.
Right. And I guess it's got a lot to do about getting to the root of that data as well, right? Because, for example, Wikipedia it is incredibly useful, right, for learning certain things, but you have to make sure that you're getting to the root of that data.
Yes, yeah.
To make sure that it's...
Absolutely. I personally use things like Wikipedia and Google Scholar, but I always go and verify through other sources as well.
Yeah, because it's like ChatGPT. Have you used ChatGPT?
Yeah, only a little bit. Yes. Yeah.
It's fascinating because it brings up so much data, which is only useful if you then go and research it yourself. It's a pathway towards.
So that's a very good example of something where we won't discourage students from using tools as long as they see them as tools and they see their fallibilities and they see how it might be incorrect or not providing the knowledge they actually need access to.
Yeah. I suppose it's a bit like the calculator can get you surface level information, but if you want infinitesimal kind of pi-based numbers, you've got to get deeper than that.
I mean, also in relation to a question like this is sometimes people think that data has to be very complicated. Sometimes it's just like standing next to a bin and seeing what people put in it. And I think that's data too. It's thinking what data do you need. And the other challenge with data, which I've found, especially when doing a PhD, is it's incredibly easy to collect a lot of data. And actually then you've got to analyse it. So I would say research design is absolutely critical part of what any student is doing.
Yeah. So what would you say is the wildest? So I'm just trying to think about practical examples. What's the wildest bit of data collection?
I can't. But there's so many really. I mean, people, I don't know. I think it sort of works the other way around really. Many people think that interviewing people will be the best way to get data.
Right.
And I think that's not, so it's not really about wild techniques. It's more about creating new techniques to gather data in. So there's some old techniques that are quite useful. I've came across one called Talk Aloud Protocol, where you sit with somebody who's doing a task and they talk you through what they're doing. Now, if you interviewed that person about that, if you said to somebody, how do you make a cup of tea?
Right.
They would give you a narrative and that would give you some data. But if you actually watch somebody making a cup of tea and they talk you through it, you would actually find out a lot more. Yeah. And it's sort of that kind of thinking about research in that way.
So like avoiding leading questions, I suppose, or avoiding too much time for people to think about their answer rather than give a proper answer. Yeah. Nice. So how would you say that on the programs that we do have at the RCA, how is that being kind of tackled at the moment? What's happening on the ground with these kind of research methods?
The School of Design has got this amazing elective called the Grand Challenge, which is part of the MA provision. So there's a 15-credit unit in the middle of the program, which gives students the opportunity to get into groups. And I mean, this is where research methods can really, really interact with people. So what happens in that is students get into groups. And they go, I mean, this year it was based on coastal erosion. So the students got into groups of around 4 to 6 and they travelled all over the UK. There was this wonderful map at the exhibition, which was excellent, showing where they'd gone across the UK to go and interview local people about what coastal erosion meant, to talk about with people who are working in those environments. So really using those. I mean, this was only a 4-week project. Right. And the depth. So I almost imagine the design futures is almost like a year-longness of that. So I do think we use the expression local and global challenges quite often because there is an assumption that global problems are all the same everywhere, right? Which is not correct because there are local issues. So wherever people are coming from on the programme, I'm hoping they'll really think about the locale they came from and what they might do in that as well.
And I guess that comes back to what you were saying before. I don't think you quite use this terminology about kind of zooming in and zooming out. Being able to see the bigger picture, but being able to find a tiny little detail within that bigger picture to focus on.
I completely agree with that. So one of the things we're doing on the programme is we've got units in envisaging futures, which is about how do you speculate and how do you construct ideas about what future challenges might be. And we got a unit called complex systems, which is about how do you contextualize these problems or issues within a macro environment. But I think that the error would be to see macro and micro as not intimately related, and to think very carefully about them, and to not believe that micro event actions and events aren't critical to solving the issues we face.
Yeah. And I guess this is me. I'm not a designer from a design background myself, but I'm assuming as well that a lot of issues come when people do try to make something local, something global, right? Well, working on a particular issue. Yes. And then assuming that it can be used to fit every issue of that type.
Yes, a lot of the applications I've been involved in the process of getting students for the program, and I know there's one student coming who's specifically looking at a decolonized version of the design methodologies.
Oh wow!
Which I'm really excited about, because there is quite a colonial history of design, sort of going out and imposing in places. So what's really important is that design gets the perspective that's not just the global north.
Yeah. And are there any big prevalent ideas within design research that you have seen disappear over the years that kind of felt like they were leading dominant ideologies that have been questioned?
Possibly just me myself. I've seen the move away from the auteur designer as the name designer as the most important thing. It still exists, and it still offers enormously exciting, interesting work. So I wouldn't say that it's gone away, because I do think it's great. But I think what I'm noticing is people working in teams a lot more, seeing their role as a designer much more in context.
Yeah, I think that's something across a lot of spheres, though, isn't it? I remember talking to Chris Mitchell on the last episode of the podcast about this move away from the old master as the person who teaches everything, and moving away from this idea of one person inherently having all the knowledge to realising that it's more spread across everything else.
Yeah.
So going back to the Grand Challenge, the idea that it's a 4-week project and it is speculative, right? So people don't actually within that period create the thing they're designing.
I think it was everything, actually. It was all forms of design in that. I mean, that's so some of them were speculative things, like people proposed a television program, but some people did things that were actually interventions. One of the things that one was a seed bomb that would be dropped into the ocean. I think that's being sort of developed. One of the reasons I came to the RCA is RCA Innovation, which is just the most excellent thing to support students' entrepreneurial skills, which actually leads into another interesting conversation about how I really hope that every student who leaves this program, the Design Futures program, sees themselves as an entrepreneur who can use local resources and ideas for good to help deal with these challenges.
And that's an interesting kind of butting of heads, I would imagine, as well, right? This idea of entrepreneurship and designing for good. Is there some kind of like strange relationship between the two, perhaps? This idea of, capital being involved in, maybe I'm going a bit large here, but capital being something that causes the problem, being the thing that comes along to solve the problem.
Well, of course, every one of our students has got to survive and in the world and make a living. And so I always recognise that, and I think students should understand that and have discussions around that. But I think in terms of entrepreneurship, that's really about how resources are used.
Right.
So it's not really just about capital. This is about how the world's resources are used. And design it has a bad history in this territory. And so this is where I think you asked how it's changed. I think designers are now really mindful of the kind of resources that are used as part of the works they're talking about, instigating.
Yeah. And you said that the seed bomb idea was being developed. Are there any other projects that are being developed?
From all our courses, there's loads of different options. There's so many on the internet. I almost feel like talking about them is, if you go to the RCA Innovation, there's so many things that are supported. I've seen great work coming out of all departments since I've been here.
Because the terracotta as well was another kind of similar challenge that's having working with ideas around, which I think is going to be coming back again next year at the RCA as well.
Yeah.
Are there any projects, RCA aside, that you think are really good examples at the moment of design kind of working for good?
Well, there is Design for Good that is an organisation that is really. I went to a really excellent event the other day. So, but that's sort of more senior leaders in the design industry coming together to look at how they can contribute to some of these global challenges. So we'll be definitely getting our students to look at the kinds of work that they've instigated and done.
And aside from these kind of predominantly design projects, are there any more kind of research-driven projects that are happening that you think are doing good?
I mean, that's another really exciting thing about coming to the RCA as a member of staff and as a student, is that there is the research work that's going on. Some of the projects are really, really exciting. There's so many around, healthcare, all sorts of things. I'm really excited by the one called the New Economic Models for Oceans, NEMO. It's across years looking at how we focus on planet-centered kind of the strategies to preserve the oceans, which are really struggling.
And it seems like there's a lot of the projects it was centered, wasn't the Grand Challenge was centered on oceans, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
But also on the RCA 2023 platform that we have, which has got all the work from our graduating students, it seems to be a big influx in people working with new plant-based materials and ocean ideas.
Yeah. Well, of course, the Earth is covered substantially in oceans, actually, more than land.
Yeah.
And I think people are rising the issue of multi-species design is a term used sometimes. People are much more conscious of the global impact of what's being done in design in the world generally.
Yeah. And what about AI as something, so thinking away from the oceans and away from the land? I suppose that's got to be a big part of what's happening in design, thinking about designing for a space that doesn't have any physicality to it.
Yes, absolutely. We have got we have students who are very interested in that. And we are focusing, I think, to be honest, we are probably focusing more on the real world problems at this particular moment, if I'm honest. But AI will help with those.
Right.
This is as long as it's seen as a tool and it can be seen in context.
Yeah.
So some of our programs are writing really good ethical descriptions of how to use AI to develop projects.
But isn't AI also potentially some kind of threat as well?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd never know how much to trust.
I've just read a book on that, but I think it's... I think that's a very complicated question.
Okay, too complicated for today.
Yes, I think so.
And within so you said that you've had people coming from biology and places like that. Do you see much kind of cross-contamination, for want of a better word, with kind of architects and artists coming in as well?
Absolutely, yes. So I mean, it's all. I think it's all up for grabs. Architects are substantially concerned about the environment. We do have a separate department at the RCA for architecture, and I work with those colleagues on various aspects, and I just saw some amazing work the other day on students really thinking about how does environmental like interior designs, for example, how are they developed sustainably. And I think back to your question around different disciplines coming to this. I think there's a massive recognition that the bodies of knowledge that have been developed within academia and in professions is all up for grabs now, and it can be accessed quite easily. And it's really curating that knowledge into shape that's critical.
Well, I guess one of the important things about kind of art and design as well is having a particular perspective that you weren't expecting, right? So some of the best artists I know, for example, are people that did physics and then went to go and do art, and then or vice versa, who are coming at it from a different with a different wavelength.
Yes, absolutely. And we'll think of ways. I mean, this is the wonderfulness of teams, because when you get collaborative teams working effectively, then there's this thing. Well, what does each person bring to the table? How does that interrelate? How can it be used really effectively to make these, to address things?
So this is a bit of a big question to kind of end the day on. But in your mind then, what differentiates between art and design? Why is it that art can't be doing these things? Or why is it that what we define as art can't be doing these things and design can? Yeah,
well, I have lots of colleagues in art and they are doing these things and they are relevant to them. But I think design is a specific field of thought and activity, and it seeks to make the changes and to actively do them. So we are, I suppose, on our program, we're probably less interested in students making an installation or a presentation that people come to see to think about it, which is totally valid.
Yeah.
But we're more interested in what might somebody go and do to support a community to actually challenge that thing or do that thing. So it's a sort of different kind of perspective on it.
Yeah, the way I've always looked at it, although I realise this is a bit of a binary way of thinking, is that art is generally kind of asking questions without wanting to get an answer, whereas design is asking questions that it wants, not necessarily going to answer, but it wants an answer to.
Yes, it often doesn't find the answer, actually, which research doesn't do either. But I do think, I've been involved in both in my life, and both are excellent, wonderful disciplines. And I expect we will have artists on this programme.
Yeah.
So it's not about that. It's more that I think the program was more likely to lead to something quite specific that happens, and probably not in a gallery.
Yeah. Although there are, do you know forensic architecture?
Yeah, excellent.
Of course,
Fantastic.
There's such a great example of something that really straddles the two. It's doing something that has real world consequence. Obviously, art has real world consequences, but it has a material, let's call it, real world consequences.
I think that's why, on the whole, most people don't bother to define the difference, because actually there isn't that much.
Yeah.
And she's not needed to do so.
Yeah.
I mean, what was the point in doing so?
Yeah.
The point is that you either are an artist or you're a designer, and you want to make some change and help things happen.
I guess the difference is it's useful to know where you think your things are going to go.
Yes. I agree with that entirely. So that's probably it. Context.
Yeah.
Where do you think it's going to land?
Where will it land in the end?
Yeah. And as long as it lands, that's the main thing.
Yeah. And with the research element of these courses, to what extent is that people developing their own very, very particular ways of engaging with research, rather than following methodologies that are received in a particular way? So I've not done a PhD myself, but I know that when you do a PhD, there are certain ways that you have to go about things in order for it to be able to be peer-reviewed and accepted. What's the difference between what's happening there with research and what's happening on these kind of programs?
So this is definitely level 7, which is a postgraduate. It's not a PhD. But what we're hoping is that by bringing, I suppose this is where the innovation happens. The innovation doesn't happen, you won't be inventing new research methods,
right?
But you might invent a new research methodology where you bring different things together to investigate something that hadn't been put together before. So that's the kind of level of innovation that we're looking for, and that could be quite surprising things. It could be, mixing interviews with drawing, or interviews with collecting samples, or it could be whatever research methods you kind of want to draw upon.
Yeah. And how are you thinking about that distinction between methods and methodology? What is the defining thing between this?
And the article is quite a complicated one that often, but the research methods are essentially the things like interviews,
right?
Counting the number of people that walk through a doorway. Those are the research methods. And methodology is the overarching consideration of how you run the whole project, and you oversituate everything.
And aside from obviously applying for the program, do you have any advice for people who want to engage with these forms of research and these forms of design? Any kind of texts or events or places or things to look at?
Yeah, so I mean that's a great question, and I personally genuinely believe, I've been asked often for what's the book that would be the best book for design futures. Well, you can find the books that are being written by just putting a search into some popular sites. I personally think don't do that. Just start on the thing you're really interested in. So think about very specifically, and be as specific as you can be about what it is that you're interested in, and start researching outwards from that point. Because in a way, if I gave you a general book about design, you don't get a lot from it. You just get a general view of design.
Right.
Whereas actually, I think what this is about for you, if you're starting this journey, is you're very specific. What are you interested in, and why do you want to do it? So I would recommend trusting yourself to just start the process straight away. And you can start this without being on any program. You can just start researching and investigating and finding out things. I mean,
that's one of the most fundamental things about education as well, right? And one of the things that people get wrong the most, which is you've got to start from a place of joy or interest and then move outwards. Far too many people think that they have to learn everything and forget the joy and the interest.
Yeah, and if I read a book, which many I've read that I literally didn't understand by the end, I go on YouTube and watch the people who wrote the book giving lectures or talking about it, or somebody else, or readers. I'm a big fan of readers, which are basically somebody else interpreting somebody's text in a more comprehensible way. So I think there's lots of ways to absorb knowledge and find out about these things. Yeah, nice. And I think that's very similar to what Martin said at the end of Martin Youth, which was, there are no books, find your own bloody books. I think there are key texts, I suppose, that get bandied around. But you can find them easily. They're also variably good as well. I mean, I've read books that are claimed to be brilliant that I'm not very sure about. And then, and so this is my opinion, and it's sort of, I think it's find the ones that you think are brilliant and you think are relevant to what you want to do. Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you very much. And thank you for joining us today. Thank you. Thanks. You've been listening to Artcast, the Royal College of Art podcast, home to the next generation of artists, innovators and entrepreneurs, and the world's #1 art and design university. You can learn more about our programmes at rca.ac.uk,
as well as finding news and events relating to the college and our application portal if you're a prospective student.